I left her, he later told a close friend, because she became gradually an awful person. She was selfish beyond any imagination. She was untruthful, unpleasant, rude, and angry all the time. Martha was never able to accept responsibility, never able to apologize, never able to look inward, never able to look at herself. Every attempt she's ever made to talk to a shrink has been a total failure. With her, it's a contest with the shrink. She just won't look inside. She won't look for a minute about why she's the way that she is. It's the kind of guiltlessness that a wild creature has, that a predator has, because it has nothing in its nature to detect its own cruelty. What an indictment. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Cheer Denise. We're going to keep going in the Martha Stewart book today. Last time we were reading, Martha had gotten her own TV show, but it actually just never got off the ground. So they did sort of this promo / teaser / I wouldn't call it a pilot because it wasn't exactly what they're going to do, but sort of like trying to get syndicators and a national sponsor to jump onto this public television show that she was going to do, but it just never got off the ground. But then she decided, well, that's fine. I'll just have my publisher make sort of like VHS tapes that people can order, and then that's what we'll do. So she did do some of that, and it was drama, trying to film that at Turkey Hill. Now she's going to be launched on Kmart. Here's the deal. She didn't want to be part of Kmart. She looked at it as less than. But when she heard the dollar figure, suddenly she wasn't too good for Kmart. So let's read that. Attention Kmart shoppers is the name of today's chapter. During the fall and winter of 1986, as Weddings was marching slowly down the aisle toward consummation, a seemingly unrelated series of events was transpiring in a Detroit suburb. These events, unbeknownst to Martha, would have a profound impact on her future. At the Troy, Michigan corporate headquarters of the giant Kmart Corporation, President and Chief Executive Officer Joe Antonini had formed an ad hoc committee with the mandate of finding the retail chain's weak or broken links and fixing them. The group of four also was asked to develop ideas for the future of the company, which at that point was riding high. That year posted sales of $23.8 billion, making it second only to Sears as America's largest retailer. Kmart counted half of all Americans among its shoppers. The committee, which insiders dubbed Joe's Kitchen Cabinet, consisted of Kmart's Vice President of Corporate Planning, Mike Wellman, a professor at Wayne State University named Pat Kelly, a lawyer and merchandising expert from New York, who was a close associate of Antonini's, Marjorie Alphys, and Barbara Loren Snyder, a former Detroit advertising executive turned consultant. The group quickly got into action, targeting the city of Nashville, Tennessee, which had one of the highest concentration of blue-collar retail outlets that were competitive with Kmart's demographics. Kmart stores there were found to be drab and dirty, and its image in the eyes of consumers was actually sub-blue-collar. One department, home and kitchen products, was underproductive in terms of sales. Its lines of merchandise were completely out of kilter with the competition, and it was horrendously disorganized. The bottom line was that everything appeared wrong, and nothing seemed too right. Antonini's team had to come up with a plan, fast, to keep Kmart shoppers from going to Walmart and Target. As a veteran advertising executive, Barbara Lauren Snyder always firmly believed in research, and her research had told her that the home was going to be the center of the American family life in the late 80s, into the 90s, and probably into the 21st century. It was called cocooning, a word coined by the corporate trend spotters and guru named Faith Popcorn. One of the reasons that Joe Antonini had reached the pinnacle at Kmart was because during his watch, Jaclyn Smith had become a spokeswoman for the company. The former star of Charlie's Angels had lent her name and face to a highly successful line of clothing, the Jaclyn Smith Signature Collection, sold exclusively by Kmart. The collaboration had been a financial success for all concerned and had made a tremendous impact on Kmart's presentation in its apparel departments. Moreover, the likable, personable, and photogenic Smith had done wonders for Kmart's public image. Lauren Snyder had come to the conclusion that Kmart needed another Jaclyn Smith, and the focus had to be on the home area of the company. Her first stop was the library, and then the bookstores, and that's where she stumbled across Martha Stewart, whose 4 books were prominently displayed. "I'm not a cook, so I'd never heard of her," Lauren Snyder acknowledged later. "I said to myself, maybe she's the woman. She'd know how to put together not only food, but centerpieces, and she might eventually be able to develop a product line of tablecloths, linens, and dinnerware." I looked at the book, and I thought, she's extremely attractive, the right age, a wife, a mother. Just seeing her picture, I thought, she's America. On a scrap of paper, she wrote down Martha's name and Westport, which was on one of the book's jacket flaps, and left the store thinking, I'm going to go for her. In her office, she dialed Connecticut information and was surprised to learn that Martha had a listed number and even picked up the phone after a couple of rings. I said, Martha, you don't know who I am, but I have outstanding credentials, which I will send to you if you're interested in my offer, which is to make you a multimillionaire. I represent a company I'm not at liberty to identify at this time. I would like to get together with you and show you why you should consider becoming a major personality for this company. She seemed suspicious, which is why I offered to send her my resume. Well, who wouldn't be suspicious? That's like the worst intro I've ever heard. You don't know me, but I'm going to make you a multimillionaire. I work for a company that I can't tell you about, but we really want to do business with you. Does that not sound like the biggest scam? If somebody called me with that load of BS, I'd hang the phone right up. She seems suspicious, so, I offered to send her my resume. Well, I hope you would. Anyway, but Martha agreed to meet with the mysterious woman on the phone. Lauren Snyder scheduled their get-together for the day after the next ad hoc committee meeting. I had to have the meeting with Martha scheduled in case they liked the idea, said the shrewd strategist. If they didn't like the idea, I could call her up and say that I had to cancel. She didn't know who I was anyway. Between getting off the phone with Martha and her meeting at Kmart headquarters, Lauren Snyder put together a campaign that made Martha the cameo for the company's home and kitchen department. The plan called for Martha's books to be sold throughout the chain. It called for an original product line, such as designer tablecloths, to be put under her name. We'll make her Ralph Lauren for the masses, she thought. She envisioned a Martha Stewart television show for Kmart and a magazine that would contain Martha's recipes and household tips to be given away at Kmart stores. Martha would also be a major part of the Kmart Sunday newspaper supplement, which at that time was seen in about 50% of all homes in America. At the kitchen cabinet meeting, Lauren Snyder stood up and gave her pitch. On the conference table, she piled a stack of Martha's books and laid out photographs, magazine, and newspaper stories about her. No one present other than Mike Wellman had ever even heard of Martha Stewart. Wellman was a gourmet cook, one of those yuppies, Lauren Snyder explained, so he was very familiar with her. In fact, Wellman told the gathering that he had overseen a Kmart stockers dinner the previous February, and the caterer had used recipes from entertaining to prepare the dinner at Wellman's instruction. Antonini was definitely interested. A visionary, he told Lauren Snyder. Go for it. Back at her office, she decided that she'd rather not have an informal meeting with Martha at her home in Westport, so she telephoned, reconfirming their meeting for the next day and suggesting that they hold it at her lawyer's office in New York, which Martha vehemently opposed. Lauren Snyder was unaware that Martha's lawyer was also Martha's unhappy husband, and that the couple was in the throes of horrible marital problems. But Lauren Snyder prevailed. On the flight to New York, the consummate strategist had decided that she wasn't going to make a fancy presentation with storyboards. From everything she'd heard about the woman, she knew she would be dealing with an enormous ego, and the best way to win that ego over was to focus on her company's desire to make Martha millions, to make Martha a star. In order to stay focused, Lauren Snyder had written a cheat sheet in ink on the inside of her right wrist, below her gold watch, so that no one could see it. It consisted of 3 words, one right under the other, which read, from top to bottom, me, star, KM. The me on the list represented Lauren Snyder's credentials, which she felt she had to reiterate because she wasn't positive that Martha had understood their significance. Star represented what Martha would become if she agreed to the pitch. Lauren Snyder would tell her, I will make you the Betty Crocker of the 1990s. You will be a multimillionaire. You will gain national recognition. You will be in every newspaper. You will be on television. You will be in magazines. I had to convince her, knowing that she had this ego thing, that she would become a star. Once I convinced her of that, I didn't think it would be as bad when I told her the company was Kmart. I wasn't going to mention Kmart until I got her so hot to trot that I wouldn't lose her. I knew that if I said Bloomingdale's or Saks Fifth Avenue, it would be a different story. But if I said Kmart right away, it would be, no. And of course, that's exactly what happened. Lauren Snyder met Martha in the lobby of Stewart, Tabori, and Chang's building, and from the moment she introduced herself, she could tell that this was the last place in the world Martha wanted to be. Once the initial introductions were made in Andy's office, the hostility between husband and wife was palpable. But Lauren Snyder proceeded with her laundry list of how she was going to make Martha rich and famous, while the unsmiling Stewarts listened intently. I got to the end, and I told her that the company that I represented was offering to give her a substantial fixed annual salary, plus expenses, for personality days at the stores throughout the country. And then I said Kmart. Martha sighed and looked very disappointed. I told her that there were 2,300 Kmart stores in the country. I told her that Martha Stewart products would be in every one of those stores. By the time I finished, I could see the impact of Kmart had softened on her. She could see the dollar signs. Suddenly, her mood had changed. She was as high as she possibly could be. They both were. Lawrence Snyder had saved discussion of compensation for last. Now she informed Martha that those millions she'd mentioned would actually be made in royalties on products that were sold, not from straight salary. "I've been advised that I can offer you $50,000 a year," she told Martha. $50,000, declared Martha incredulously. "You've got to be crazy." Martha went absolutely berserk, Lawrence Snyder recalled. She said it was horrible. She demanded to know why I was wasting her time. Lawrence Snyder, who had withheld the real number she'd been authorized to offer, sighed, stood up and said, "Well, Martha, what did you expect?" $200,000, Martha responded. Lawrence Snyder thought, bingo. Thanking the Stewarts for their time, she said, "You'll be hearing from our lawyer because we're going to be able to work this out. And Martha, you will be a star." Outside, Lawrence Snyder grabbed a cab, laughing all the way to LaGuardia, where she raced to the first available payphone and placed a call to Marge Alphys. "We got her," she whispered into the phone. "Start the negotiations." What Martha and Andy had no way of knowing was that an annual fee of $250,000 had been authorized by Antonini. Kmart had gotten its new spokeswoman for $50,000 a year less than it had budgeted. But what would have happened had the deal fallen through? To cover all possibilities, Lawrence Snyder had a backup spokeswoman in the wings, a woman named Jennifer Lang, a personable cookbook author and chef whose husband owned Manhattan's Café des Artistes. At Kmart headquarters, Joe Antonini was happy about the deal Lawrence Snyder had cut with Martha, but he wasn't breaking out the Dom Perignon. $200,000 a year was still $200,000 a year for somebody he'd never even heard of. Several weeks after Lawrence Snyder met with Martha, she arranged for her to visit Kmart headquarters to have lunch with Antonini and the Kmart chairman, Ben Faber. It was really odd because Martha showed up with sores all over her hands. And Joe looked at her and said, "Martha, what's wrong? What's the problem here?" And she said, "Well, I worked all day yesterday in the rose garden." She actually came in there with no nail polish on and with her hands totally messed up from thorns. But that's the side of her that I wanted to present to the public, to the consumers who were Kmart's target. But as it turned out, they were not Martha's target. Lawrence Snyder and the honchos at Kmart didn't realize it at the time, but Martha would become a major aggravation, and her products would be only modestly successful while the PR and publicity would be enormous. In the end, Martha agreed to the $200,000 a year for 5 years, plus $3,000 for each in-store visit she made. She was required by contract to make $30,000 a year, which added another $90,000 annually to her fee, plus expenses and sundry perks, along with royalties. Looking down the road, she hoped to make a fortune. When news of the deal broke in early 1987, Martha spread the word that the contract was worth $5 million, a misleading and erroneous amount widely reported by the press. As Lawrence Snyder saw it, Martha wanted everybody to think she was getting millions up front, which was part of her own strategy to further enhance the Martha Stewart image. The deal made headlines across the country, but many observers saw it as a freaky marriage. The New York Times pointed out, quote, "Many strange combinations have come out of American kitchens in the 80s, but Kmart may have served up the pied de resistance with its recent announcement that entertainment guru Martha Stewart has signed a 5-year contract to be its national spokeswoman and a consultant for home fashions. Martha Stewart's link with the nation's second-largest retailer might have seemed an odd combination, but then people once laughed at goat cheese pizza, too." Kmart launched Martha Stewart with a series of spot television and magazine ads. Its objective was to get her face in front of the public and tie her upscale image to the company as quickly as possible. But it actually took 2 years for the Martha Stewart signature brands to hit the shelves. So that's the end of that chapter, but now we're starting into part 5 of the book, and this part is entitled A Bitter-Sweet Concoction. Let's see what this is about, shall we? This chapter is entitled The Split. Now, how many of you have been waiting for this? Raise your hand high. I have. My gosh, this book has just been almost as bad as going through your own bad marriage. Beginning in the mid-70s, when Martha was working as a stockbroker, Andy wondered whether their marriage could survive. By 1982, when her first book was published, the idea of leaving her had become a reality for him. Several times in the early to mid-80s, Martha had also voiced her unhappiness, sometimes in vitriolic notes in which she expressed her disgust with Andy and said she wished he'd leave. Martha had left one such note on the top of a cupboard. Upset after reading it, Andy had dropped it where he found it, and Martha Sr. happened to come upon it. Shocked by its content, she confronted her daughter, who then berated Andy for embarrassing her by leaving the note in plain sight. The abuse knows no bounds with this woman. You write somebody a vitriolic note, then somebody else finds it, and you're like, how dare you leave that out for other people to see? How dare you write it, you wench? Anyway, by the fall of 1986, as the final edits were being made on Weddings and on Martha's TV special, Andy had started keeping a mental record of good times versus bad, and the bad times far outweighed the good. He decided he finally had it with Martha. Once again, though, he suggested they seek counseling, but this time he told her that if they couldn't resolve their problems, he'd have no other choice but to leave her. Martha just went nuts, because she knew Andy was serious this time, the confidant said. One afternoon, while the Stewarts were bickering in the checkout line at Stu Leonard's, a popular supermarket where an autographed 8x10 glossy of Martha hung on the wall next to other celebrities like Paul Newman, Robert Vaughn, and Gene Wilder, Martha exploded in a screaming fit as other shoppers blanched behind their carts. She lost it, an eyewitness recalled. She was screaming at him because he told her that he was leaving, and she was so angry. It seemed like she didn't care who recognized her or who heard what she was saying. I remember her yelling at one point, "Now that you have money of your own, you're leaving me after all these years?" Other shoppers giggled as they watched the furious, the self-proclaimed housewife extraordinaire marching out of the store spitting fire with her red-faced husband in tow. However, Martha did agree, once again, at Andy's behest, to see a therapist. Andy couldn't believe what Martha was saying because she was the one becoming richer by the day, but was claiming to the shrink that Andy no longer needed her because of his financial successes, a confidant noted. Andy was so frustrated and angry, he said, "Can you believe her? What a grotesque, crazy, ridiculous, misplaced accusation." In early January of 1987, Andy secretly began looking for an apartment in Manhattan. A few weeks later at dinner with the Stewarts, a friend in whom Andy had confided let his secret slip by asking how the apartment hunting was going. It was not the way Andy had wanted Martha or Lexi, who was present that night, to learn about his plan to move out. The disclosure touched off an emotional avalanche that engulfed the entire family. "It was a disaster," revealed a friend. Martha had known nothing about Andy's plans. She went absolutely nuts. Lexi became furious at her father, and Andy felt guilty and horrible. They all were suffering. In the subsequent confrontation, Andy admitted to Martha that he had been unfaithful during their marriage, a revelation similar to the one that Martha had made years earlier when she was working as a stockbroker. They were having a huge argument, a friend said later, and the subject of affairs came up in the context that it had been a two-way thing. Martha asked Andy for details, but he was reluctant to tell her anything other than to say yes, he had done that, and so had she. Still, Martha pleaded with Andy not to leave, telling him that she loved him, a feeling she rarely declared. With Weddings about to come out, the last thing in the world that Martha needed was a marriage scandal, a close friend observed, and she didn't want to tarnish her image with the Kmart people. It was clear she was manipulating Andy to stay because of her career, and that's what he came to believe too. Martha suggested to Andy that if he really wanted to distance himself from her, he should move into the barn. And he did for a short time. The quid pro quo was that they would try therapy one more time. Martha agreed, but their sessions were a repeat of past unsuccessful visits. On April 1st, 1987, with a shaky marital truce in effect, Martha put on her confident, successful, happy author's face for the much ballyhooed publication of Martha Stewart Weddings, the dedication of which read, "To my husband Andy, our wedding will always remain my favorite, and to my daughter Alexis, whose wedding I look forward to with pleasure." Martha boasted to the interviewer, "The hard work is about to begin on this book. They're sending me on a back-breaking book tour." A full-page photo in the book's introduction showed Martha, her hand clasped in Andy's, happily leaving the Episcopal Chapel at Columbia under a shower of rice a quarter-century earlier after being joined in holy matrimony. Later, Frank Kostira claimed credit for having taken that photo and asserted that his sister never gave him timely acknowledgement or payment. At one point, he considered suing her for a copyright infringement. We'll go on, but isn't this family crazy? Who would take a picture of your sister at her wedding and then when she used it in a book be like, "I thought about suing her for copyright infringement. I was the one who took that picture and I didn't get any financial compensation from it." It's like, what's the matter with all of you guys? I mean, considering how they grew up, I guess it was just a very cold, austere house. There wasn't a lot of love, not a lot of chumminess going on. So maybe it made sense to him, but it seems crazy to me. Among those listed in the acknowledgments was Elizabeth Hawes, who, Martha wrote, "worked with me on the text of Entertaining, and has again lent her beautiful prose to this work." Later, Hawes said, "Even though cover credit was written into the contract this time, there was a question raised by Martha about whether my name would go on the cover because it would somehow interfere with the frosting on the wedding cake. I said, too bad, it's in the contract." But none of that was known to Martha's readers, who snapped up the 75,000 first printing of the beautifully designed and illustrated $50 book. Despite their growing marital difficulties, Andy and Martha had double-teamed the executives at Crown and the editors at Clarkson Potter to get everything they wanted in Weddings. Together they were very insistent about the quality of the pictures and the typeface and the way it was laid out, because they wanted it to look a very special way, Hawes said. They were very demanding. Martha would go into these layout meetings when they were putting things together, with my text in hand, fussing about the style. Martha and Andy saw it as a breakthrough book that nobody had ever done before. There were certainly bride books out there in bride magazines, but Martha and Andy and the publishers thought that this would be huge. And it was. Andy, who had produced a number of his company's books in Japan, had discovered a paper stock there that he thought would be appropriate for weddings and recommended it to be used. At the last minute, Carol Southern said, Martha came rushing in and said she liked the Japanese paper better than the paper we were using. "I want you to use this paper," she said. And we said, "Oh God, Martha, we're already over budget." And she said, "Well, let's investigate it." In the end, we used it. Alan Merkin said, quote, "She was a perfectionist, and she wanted everything to be right, and she'd fight to get it right." Privately, he had been fuming because Martha had not delivered Weddings early enough for Clark Potter's scheduled pub date. Her lateness in turning in manuscripts was a constant problem. As Merkin noted, she was always so busy with so many other things. But for once, Martha's tardiness worked in everyone's favor. We discovered that the wedding season really started in February. Because of Martha's lateness, we had lucked into a better time to launch a wedding book. As with most of Martha's previous books, Weddings was well received by critics. The New York Times called it a $50 5-pound ode to perfect. The luxuriously photographed, romantically written tome is a wedding voyeur's dream. The Times quoted Martha as calling her latest work a social document of life in the 1980s, describing the brides depicted as icons of the 80s, and declared that the documented weddings were fabulous, and some very, very fabulous. The Times noted that the book features the photogenic Miss Stewart herself, and the photogenic Miss Stewart declared, "I am a commitment to a kind of lifestyle, that's what I am," which she asserted was the reason for her enormous popularity. Nowhere in the article was the real writer Elizabeth Hawes mentioned. Patricia Lee Brown of the Times proclaimed, "Martha Stewart has a perfect life. The exotic chickens she raises at her Westport, Connecticut farmette are perfect. The azalea bushes she planted in the garden for her husband Andy for Father's Day are perfect." Andy wouldn't be around to see them. He was in the process of packing his bags the day the Times story appeared. Martha told the Times she was already hard at work on her 6th book, The Wedding Planner, and her 7th, Cooking from the Garden. She said that for another future book, she had purchased an 1838 federal house nearby and planned to write about its restoration and do a video on the project. She also boasted that she had started production on a series of hour-long videos called Martha Stewart's Secrets for Entertaining, and she discussed plans for a syndicated TV show. But her books would always be first, she declared. "I try to write about subjects nobody has treated in the personal way I do," she told the Times. "What I'm writing about is a lifestyle and a catalog of material I've paid attention to for a long time. I want my books to be standard, a standard of perfection from which people can pull ideas. It's an idea I got from an American Poultry Association book called A Standard of Perfection." Nothing was reported about the wedding experts' marital difficulties. The key people at Crown and Clarkson Potter had become painfully aware that their best-selling author's marriage was falling apart on the eve of the launch of what they hoped would be her biggest book ever. The publisher had big plans for Weddings, including a massive promotional tour for Martha and a launch party in New Orleans that cost $100,000. Martha also got her first booking on The Oprah Show, with the famous host telling her millions of viewers, "If you're planning a wedding, it is the book to have." Sales, of course, shot through the roof. But, as one Crown Publishing Group wag put it later, the irony was too much. Here was Martha promoting this beautiful book about weddings, and her marriage was exploding in front of her eyes. We figured the press was going to have a field day. The joke around the office was that we should change the title to Martha Stewart Divorces. At one point, Martha met with Alan Merkin to fill him in on what was transpiring back at Turkey Hill. It was a troubling thing to her because they were very close, and at some point I guess that just went away, he said. It was a very difficult thing for her to come to grips with because she had always done everything she wanted to do. And I think that she would have wanted, at that point, to stay married. And Andy was probably just a little bit lonely because Martha was so dedicated to her career. I can assure you, Alan Merkin, that that is not the way things went down. Imagine her waltzing into his office. All she's trying to do is paper over her reputation with the publisher of the book. She waltzes in there and she says, Well, it's very difficult for me because I was always close with Andy, and now for whatever reason he won't explain it to me. He says he no longer feels close to me, and that's come as an enormous shock, as you can imagine. I can't explain what happened. And Merkin's like, yeah, probably he feels a little lonely because you're at work all the time. Yeah, I don't think that's why Andy wants to leave, because she works a lot. He's probably super grateful when she's away. It's all those times when she's home. In early April 1987, just 3 months before the Stewarts' 27th wedding anniversary, and while Martha was on the road hawking weddings, Andy split. It was not an easy thing for him to do, and he later told friends that he cried the day he did it. Only 2 people were at Turkey Hill that day: Kathy Tatlock, who was doing pre-production for the Secrets of Entertaining video project, and Martha's loyal housekeeper, Nessie Fernandez. Fernandez had tears in her eyes, too, when Andy told her, "Look, Nessie, I just want you to know, I don't want to leave, but I can't stand this anymore." She said she understood. Andy packed several bags and wrote a Dear Martha letter, which he left on the kitchen table. Kathy Tatlock had been hired by Martha a few months earlier as a 50-50 partner to direct the video series, but Martha kept watering down her deal without Tatlock's knowledge. On the day Andy split, he handed Tatlock the contract for the first time, which had her down for a surprising 10%. I was walking Andy out to the car, still in a state of shock over the contract, when he suddenly turned to me and said, "Kathy, I'm through with Martha. I'm moving out. I won't be coming back." And that was the exact moment that he left. Andy drove into Manhattan, where he took up temporary residence at the University Club. Several weeks later, he moved into a small apartment off Central Park West. "I left her," he later told a close friend, "because she became gradually an awful person. She was selfish beyond any imagination. She was untruthful, unpleasant, rude, and angry all the time." Martha was never able to accept responsibility, never able to apologize, never able to look inward, never able to look at herself. Every attempt she's ever made to talk to a shrink has been a total failure. With her, it's a contest with the shrink. She just won't look inside. She won't look for a minute about why she's the way that she is. It's the kind of guiltlessness that a wild creature has, that a predator has, because it has nothing in its nature to detect its own cruelty. What an indictment. When Martha stopped home on a short breather to change wardrobes before reassuming her pitch stops around the country, she found Andy's note and was told he'd flown the coop. She was devastated. For Martha, the best of times had become the worst of times. Not long after he left, Andy paid a visit to his friends George and Claire McCulley. The breakup happened when the book came out, and Martha thought that was deliberate on Andy's part, Claire McCulley said. She was very angry because she felt that there was probably the potential for some adverse publicity, but Andy had reached his breaking point. He said, "I don't want film crews in the kitchen in the morning. I want to be able to come down and make myself a cup of coffee. It's my house, and our house has become a studio. We need a home." While he was here, Martha called and said Andy was going through a crisis. He was just being ridiculous. She said his leaving had nothing to do with her. She said, "Men get like this." And she thought he'd come back. Meanwhile, someone who knew what was going on behind the seemingly cheerful facade of Turkey Hill dropped a dime, telephoned the tabloids. On April 24th, 1987, under the gossipy headline, "Is Divorces Next?" the New York Daily News gloatingly reported, Andrew Stewart, whose wife Martha wrote the lavish coffee table book Weddings, has been apartment hunting in New York. Insiders say the Stewarts' marriage of 26 years has hit rocky waters. The move comes at a rather awkward time, since Martha, the wedding authority and syndicated columnist, is on a national tour pushing sales of the new book. Both Stewarts vehemently deny any marital strife. "It's completely and absolutely false," said Andrew. "We are happily married," Martha said. Well, I hope I never find myself happily married then. What is wrong with Martha? That is one of the most frightening things I've ever read. His description of her is kind of scary, that she was like a predator who had no ability. Let's just read that line one more time, shall we? Andrew Stewart said of Martha, "She won't look for a minute about why she is the way she is. It's the kind of guiltlessness that a wild creature has, that a predator has, because it has nothing in its nature to detect its own cruelty." I think I would die if somebody thought that about me. If I had done so much to somebody that they walked away with that in their mouth, I mean, scathing. But he put up with it for like 27 years? The man deserves a breath of fresh air. That's all I can say. Can you imagine being under the boot of someone like that for 27 years? Really should have stood up to her more often, but it's interesting. He might have been such a sort of go-getter in his own field. I mean, I guess some people could call him ruthless in his negotiations, but that's what his job was. That's what people expected him to do. But it's interesting. I've seen this before. People who are on top of their game when it comes to work or, some project or whatever, just killing it. But then you find out that in their personal life, they can't stand up for themselves. It's a very strange dichotomy, because you would think that this person who seems so confident would also be confident in all realms. But it didn't seem like his confidence extended to his ability to deal with Martha. But then you wonder if his confidence that he had at work was just all of this energy built up at having to bite his tongue whenever he was around Martha. So when he got to work, he had all this just built up need to produce some kind of results because he's so frustrated at home for what he couldn't manage. Who knows? That might be a little bit armchair expertish of me to say that. But anyway, it's a very interesting study, because you just would not expect somebody who is so good at his job, negotiating, getting people to back down, getting people to take a different side of things, getting people to agree to things they didn't necessarily want to agree to. He couldn't seem to negotiate in his own marriage. But then again, if you're working with a guiltless creature who doesn't have anything in his nature to identify its own cruelty, well, what hope do you have? What hope do you have to negotiate with a monster like that? So, I don't want the breakdown of anybody's marriage, but I have to say, I think very few people would have been like, Andy, you should stay. I don't know if you could find anybody who would agree that Andy should stay for that. When we get into the savageness surrounding their divorce, can you imagine trying to divorce Martha Stewart? It's going to be just as painful as you'd expect. Well, thanks for hanging out with me. I'm going to see you guys tomorrow. For the Friday News Roundup, what we're really going to do is we got to talk about some of this Met Gala fashion. I have been itching to discuss it, but I had promised 3 days of Martha Stewart, so 3 days of Martha Stewart I gave you. But I cannot wait to tear down those looks. Some of them were pretty awesome. And some of them were like, did you just go to your mom's closet and pick out, something from 1986? I mean, what is this? This is like the most boring suit I've ever seen. I mean, yeah, the shoulder pads are big, but like that's all the effort we get? I mean, truly, truly, truly boring outfits on some of these people. It was just like either it was fabulous or it was wretched. There seemed to be no middle ground. Or you just kind of came and did your own thing and then also looked dumb. So we got a lot to talk about. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. I hope I see you. Bye.